Welcome to Women and Work, the show where we examine the real-life challenges of women who are building careers, overcoming barriers, and redefining success on their own terms. I'm Diane Mocha, the founder and CEO of the Mom Sub Childcare app, and I'm digging deep with our guests to explore how women like you can change the way work can fit your life. Today, I'm talking with Dr. Maria Malayter, a business psychologist and professor with a PhD in leadership and organizational change. Maria is a wellness coach, speaker, and the author of several books, including one sharing her journey back from a traumatic brain injury. Maria, thanks for being here and being an inspiration to people who may be facing change in their life. And it seems like change is a theme in your life and your work. Was that always part of your mindset or something that changed?
Well, Diane, thank you for having me. I think change found me. And so I've just always kind of been attached to change and how life disruptions, like maybe you have a life disruption and then what do you do with it? And so going through some early life disruptions kind of led me to focusing on change, including the traumatic brain injury.
So tell us that story. It sounds like you were in a minor car accident, but it had a major impact on your life.
Yes, yes. So I felt like it was top of my career. I was getting ready to go downtown to go to this really cool conference and give a speech there. And I was driving home from a Bible study and I rear-ended somebody. Now, I thought, okay, nothing happened. I didn't hit my head or anything like that. And then all of a sudden, as time went on, my personality started to change. And so I wasn't myself anymore. I almost had no filter. So anything I thought of would just come right out of my mouth. And then I was super easy to anger, easy to startle. And then I felt my life was racing. And so something was wrong. And then it took a while. It took about 4 months until they figured out that I had a traumatic brain injury.
Wow. And were you going to doctors? Did you think it was something, physical? Did you think that it was some mental illness? Like, how did you get to that point where you got that diagnosis? And then what do you do with that?
Yeah, so I was going to a lot of different doctors because I was having extreme headaches and we were just thinking, oh, let's do an MRI and let's check this out and see what's there. And nothing's there because sometimes those don't show up. And I never did hit my head. It was just my brain hitting my forehead from the impact. So that's how that happened. And so we ended up finding out because I was working with a therapist and then talking to the doctors. And they said, maybe you should talk to somebody else. And we have this guy who's a neuro psychologist or psychiatrist, and he has these special techniques to scan the brain, like a QEEG and a SPECT scan. And so I thought, I better try and find out.
So at that point, you said you were at the top of your game. You had a great career, but you, I know, suffered a job loss at some point.
Yes.
Was it connected to this? And was this part of the big change that you had to confront in life?
Yes, it was yes. So what was going on is my personality changed so much, and so I actually got sent to the EAP, and they said, we don't think she's right, and so I was kind of put on leave. And so in that, for some reason, a narrative was created, and then I was released from work. And it was, I probably couldn't have done the job because one of the things that happened is I had a frontal lobe injury. And so that wipes out a bit of the short-term memory. So I couldn't have been and gone back to being a professor at that time.
So Maria, you were at the top of your game, like you said, in your career. It sounds like you loved being a professor. Was this part of your identity? And did losing that job have an impact on you identifying with who you were?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So I was, even my email is still Professor Maria at Yahoo. So one of my emails. But yes, that's a huge identity shift. And then the whole idea of losing all the colleagues, because I had been with at school for 18 years. So there was a huge identity shift, and it was all about who could I become now, because I wasn't sure how I'd recover from that traumatic brain injury. And so I had to rethink that and figure out who am I at my core.
So sounds simple on the outside, but not at all, right?
Right.
And I understand that you went through a bout of depression. Was that after the job loss, after the traumatic brain injury? And is that something that you just learned to cope and went past? Or do you feel like it's always there and something you have to be aware of and still deal with having coping skills when it comes to it?
So I think I've had depression for most of my life, but it really was maximized during the traumatic brain injury. So it was very extreme, and then I was put on a medicine that really dampened down who I was. And so my affect was really flat, and I wasn't as smiley as I am now. And so I had here's the true story. The true story is I'm stuck in this depression, and it wasn't myself. And these ladies at church came up to me and they said, "Here, we want to give you a gift." They surrounded me and they gave me a prayer shawl. And from that, I thought, holy cow, I'm really sick and I need to do something about it. And so it kind of woke me up from there. And I thought, people who get prayer shawls are usually really, really sick. And so they could tell I needed prayers and help. And that's when I decided I needed to get out of it and had to figure out a way to get out of it.
So you were in a fog.
I was in a fog.
And the medication may have kept you safe, from doing something severe, but it didn't pull you out of that fog.
Right.
Did you need more than medication? Did you need more than a prayer shawl? What did you need to pull yourself out of that fog?
Well, I actually, one of the things I needed was singing. And so I actually was invited to sing in the church choir. And that's when we found out that the singing was helping my brain heal and it was returning my short term memory. So, because in singing, it crosses two sides of the hemisphere of your brain. And we found that out when I went to one of the appointments and I walked in and I was singing lyrics. And he's like, "How are you doing that?" And I said, "Come on, now I'm in the choir." And he's like, "No, that's telling us that your brain is healing." So that was one of the pieces. And then the other piece was taking a look at wellness on a larger scale and what are all the different things I could do. And I've always learned and talked about the multidimensional wellness. And so what I started riding my bike, I was doing things like Tai Chi to help work with my brain. I was making sure I was with people, the social aspect, paying attention to my emotions. I changed how I ate. So there were just a lot of different things, getting the right amount of sleep, drinking water. So looking at all the dimensions of wellness to figure out how I could get better. And that's why I love that model.
And one dimension of wellness is spending time doing things that you enjoy. And generally, that means having a career that you're going to devote yourself to and enjoy. You had a career, you could no longer do that as far as you knew. It was your identity. I'm guessing when you were young, did you always want to be a professor? And did that somehow block you from moving past to a new career? And then how did you end up in a new career?
There were a lot of pathways, a lot of different pathways. So I did end up working with a career coach, and I thought that was the best decision I could make. And in that, she immediately had some phenomenal exercises, which I currently do with people today when I work with them on careers, about how you kind of really reflect about what happened with the job that you left and what you learned. And then what are your true motivated skills right now? Like, what at your core do you really get motivated about? And how could you do that in other places? So some of the elements of being a professor and teaching, I love teaching, I love inspiring, counseling, all those different things, but you can do that in a lot of different places. So I had to take the label off and look at the skills instead.
And do you meet other women who are in that kind of transition? Maybe it's not something as traumatic as a traumatic brain injury, but where they've been in one career and they need to, or feel a sense that they should go into another career. And it's not just like switching a light bulb on, right? It's a much more of a journey, right?
Yes, yes. So it is, yes, I meet women like that all the time. And what they're looking for is what is their true give back purpose or transcendence, I guess, is like the purpose of what they want to do and give back. And so it is a journey because it's after a person has been working at a certain job for a long time, that's easy. But then getting to the part of making the change is challenging. But knowing that change is a process makes it a little easier.
So since then, you've done amazing things. You've gotten all kinds of awards and accolades. I mean, your bio is so long, full of very impressive achievements. When other women hear about that, sometimes it might make them feel less significant. So how do you share with younger women or even women at any age, that they might not be where you are, but they still have all that potential?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, I'm wired to be a high achiever. So that's kind of something that's about me. Not everybody is like that. So I'm always learning and doing things. However, it's important for me to kind of talk with people and identify who is their core self. So when I'm coaching some people, they could write off a whole list of things that they've been doing and say, I've done nothing. And then I reflect back and I say, hey, by the way, you're committed to your family and your job. And so you're doing both of those very well. So even though it may seem like a bit of a scramble, it's really on purpose and point.
They say every day when we look at our to-do list, we're looking at the rest of the mountain we still need to climb, and we don't take time to step back and look at how much of the mountain we've already climbed up. And sometimes it's so much further than we realize until we sort of take that step back, have
Right.
that gratitude, have that sense of accomplishment in ourself, no matter what it is, right? It
Right.
doesn't have to be a career award. It could be all kinds of things. And
Right.
you talk about in your podcast and I think in your book about, the joy, right? The joy that people can have in their life and how bike riding brought you joy. It's actually something we have in common.
Oh,
So I
awesome.
ride every day. As long as it's above 50 degrees, I get on my bike and I ride. I love going through the forest preserve because I'm getting that
Yes,
nature
yes,
as
for
well as
sure.
the exercise. And so one element that brings a lot of people joy in life is family, but it's not something that you talk about in your bio, for instance. So how has family played or not played a part in your life? How is being a high achiever and not focused on family different for you? And what part of life does family comprise?
So, well, that's been an evolution in itself. So, I mean, to be very candid, I had a traumatic upbringing, and that was my parents passed away when I was very little, which those kind of things will lead to other people saying that those types of kids will never amount to anything. And so that's the kind of feedback that I would get when I was growing up. And so that was a little bit messy and disconcerted. So I definitely knew and was motivated when my high school counselor told me I'd never finish college or I shouldn't go. So so that was an interesting journey. But back to the family question is I've had a supportive family from my friends' families because sometimes when trauma's in family, it makes it challenging. So my friends' families surrounded me and said, you're going to school, you're going to make it, you're going to be successful. And those people are still around in my life. And one of those people I have to give a shout out is a friend that I met in kindergarten. And then later in high school, her family brought me in and I lived with them. So she's my sister.
Wow. So you found family in other places, not necessarily the blood family that people think of.
Right.
And you found family, it sounds like, in your church
Yes,
as
that's
well,
for
right?
sure.
That prayer shawl was a defining moment in your
Yes.
life, So it wasn't somebody that had an intervention with a bunch of people, saying things, but it was a gesture that
Yes.
had a meaning in your life. So do you feel that that kind of family you relate to the same as maybe a mother does when it comes to, her children, that this is an important part of my life and something that I pay attention to, nurture, and I get, something back as well?
Yes, yes. So, I mean, I think there's lots of different environments that I've been in that are nurturing that way. Um, I mean, for college, I was a member of a sorority, so then that brought me a bunch of sisters. Then in my church, that's the same kind of family experience. I did have some distant relatives that were there that were blood related, but yeah, it's that experience of care for one another and just being committed and saying that it's okay that it's not a blood relative and having that care.
So you talk about being a high achiever. So you've got this foundation, you've got a podcast, you've got a leaders collective at an online community. called school. So you're doing all these different things. You're helping others, you're a coach. And a lot of people say doing that gives back to yourself, but what do you do for yourself? Do you take the time to say, I'm doing all these things and I'm achieving all these things, but there's still some other element for me?
Absolutely. Well, I can't say I'm great at it, but I do play pickleball. And I usually play Mondays and Fridays at 6:45 a.m. So that's one thing that I do. And then I was uh, I was a photography major as an undergrad, and I do mindful photography, and I'll just walk and I'll just see what I see to just become aware of the beauty around me. And one thing I look for is hearts, and I find little hearts all over in nature. Uh, so those are some of the things, and definitely liking exercise and riding bikes and things for myself. And church is something that's for myself.
And you exude that beauty out of you, that
Thank
happiness,
you.
that smiley person that you knew was in there that you had to bring back out.
Yes, yes,
I love that you're
absolutely.
here and that you're sharing that spirit and enthusiasm with other women. And I thank you so much for
Yes.
sharing your story on today's episode of Women in Work. If you found this conversation helpful, inspiring, or refreshing for uncovering the messy parts of life, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, share it with a friend. And if you want to invest in a solution to the childcare crisis, you can reach out to me about the MomSub Equity Crowdfunding Campaign at diane@momsub.com or connect with MomSub on LinkedIn or other social media platforms. Remember, this is your space for candid conversations, expert insights, and real stories from women who have been there. Keep pushing boundaries and spreading your love and encouragement to other women who need it.